The black and white checkered floor stretched toward infinity under the fluorescent hum of dying lights, and at 3:22 in the morning on a humid August night, that floor became a battlefield. Vivien Rivera did not know she was about to meet the man who would break everything she had rebuilt, but the universe had already decided it, and fate moved like a blade through butter. The diner smelled of stale coffee and grease and something else now, panic, thick and choking. A child lay twisted on the tiles, his small body trembling like a candle in a windstorm, his legs beneath him at angles that made no sense because his legs had never made sense, had never worked since the moment he was born into a world that seemed determined to break him from the start. Nico Russo knelt beside his son Micah, and the man who had signed 43 death warrants without flinching, the man whose handshake was a contract written in blood, the man who owned half of San Francisco's underground and had turned the other half to ash just by existing, that man's hands shook. They trembled like he was a child himself, learning for the first time that power meant nothing when the person you loved most was burning with fever on a kitchen floor. Marcus Webb, the diner manager, stood frozen behind the counter. His face had gone the color of old bone. Two bodyguards, Marco and Franco, broad-shouldered and suited despite the heat, exchanged a look neither had seen in 15 years. The boss did not kneel. The boss did not touch the ground. The boss did not show vulnerability like the lid of a coffin being sealed. "Get an ambulance," Nico said, and his voice came out rough, like something had been scraped inside his throat. Marco reached for his phone, but Micah's breathing had changed. It had become shallow, labored, and no one moved correctly because no one knew how to move in the presence of a man whose composure had just shattered. Then the kitchen door swung open. Vivien Rivera stepped through like someone who had already lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. She was 28 years old but looked decades older, her dark hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face, her eyes hollow from 3 nights without proper sleep. The uniform she wore was a light blue that had faded to the color of old sky, and there were 3 stains on it: coffee from the 7 a.m. rush, grease from the lunch service, and something else she could not identify. She had $34 folded in her pocket. $34 was the distance between her and the street. Everything she had ever owned had burned 3 days ago in a fire that took her apartment, her clothes, her photographs of her late husband, her children's baby books, and the folder with $150,000 in unpaid medical debts that now belonged to her. The debts were not going anywhere. The debts were patient. The debts would follow her like a shadow that refused to leave. She had been in the back, prepping for the night shift, when she heard the sound. Not a scream. Worse than a scream. A child's body hitting the floor with the weight of helplessness. Vivien moved to Micah and dropped to her knees in one motion. Her hands, calloused from years of washing dishes and scrubbing pots, moved with absolute certainty across the boy's forehead, his neck, checking for things she somehow knew to check for even though she had never been trained, had never taken a class, had only loved her own children fiercely enough to understand their bodies like a language. Ice water. Now, she said to no one in particular, and Marco moved before he realized he was moving. Elevate his feet. Someone get me a clean cloth. Do not move him. Do not move him. Nico Russo watched this woman he had never seen before in his life take command of the space like she owned it, like she had been waiting her entire life to be useful at exactly this moment. Her voice was steady, and there was something in the way she spoke that made his blood slow down. Not fear. Something else. Recognition. She pressed a cloth to Micah's neck, ice water soaking into the fabric, and she was talking to the boy now, speaking words calm and quiet as a prayer. You are okay. You are so okay. Your fever is high but you are okay. Can you hear me? You are going to be okay. 7 minutes passed. The boy's breathing steadied. The trembling slowed. When the ambulance arrived, when the paramedics wheeled the stretcher toward the door, when Nico Russo stood up and looked at Vivien Rivera for the first time as a full person and not a phantom, something moved behind his eyes. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. He memorized her face the way a man memorizes a prayer he will need to recite at the moment of his death. "What is your name?" he asked, and his voice came out like venom wrapped in velvet. "Vivien," she whispered, and then she was gone, moving back toward the kitchen because the breakfast rush would start in 4 hours and the coffee would not brew itself. Marco leaned close to his boss. "What was that?" he asked quietly. Nico did not answer. He did not move. He just stood there on the black and white checkered floor, and in his mind, something was already being built. Something intricate. Something that would take weeks to complete. Something that would change everything. But what Vivien did not know was that she had just become indispensable to the most dangerous man in the city. Before we continue, drop a like if this story is hitting you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. What happens next will shatter everything. Now, let us go back to the beginning, to 3 days before that August night when Vivien Rivera stood in the ashes of everything she had ever known. The rain fell like needles on the day her world ended. Not metaphorical rain. Actual rain, cold and deliberate, falling on a building that had once been her home and was now just a skeleton of charred wood and melted dreams. The fire had started in the electrical wiring on a Wednesday afternoon, and by the time the firefighters arrived, there was nothing left to save except the will to survive, which Vivien had in abundance and wanted to surrender completely. She stood on the sidewalk with Maria and Luis, her children, 7 and 9 years old respectively, both wrapped in blankets that had been donated by a neighbor. Maria was crying, but it was the quiet crying of a child too exhausted to make noise. Luis stood absolutely still, and in that stillness was a kind of destruction that scared Vivien more than flames ever could. The landlord is saying the building was insured, a firefighter had told her, but you'll need to contact him about your belongings. Her belongings. As if what had burned were things and not her entire life compressed into 4 rooms and 2 closets and a drawer where she kept letters from her husband written before the cancer took him, letters that smelled like his cologne, letters that were now ash. She had $34. This was the number she kept repeating because if she did not say it out loud, it seemed impossible. $34 in her bank account. $34, that was the entire distance between her children and sleeping on the street. The debts had started accumulating the moment her husband got sick. Marcus, her husband, had been a carpenter, skilled and steady, and then one day he woke up with pain in his side that would not stop. The doctors said cancer. The doctors said they could treat it, and they could, for a price. $300 for the initial consultation. $400 for the first imaging. $200 for the oncologist. $53,000 for the first round of chemotherapy, which insurance refused to cover because it was considered experimental. They had spent everything. They had borrowed against the house. They had borrowed against borrowed money. And then Marcus died anyway, on a Tuesday night in March, with his hand in hers, telling her to take care of the babies and not to let the world make her bitter. She had tried not to let it make her bitter. She had gotten a job at Rosewood Diner 3 months after the funeral. Graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., $5.25 per hour, plus tips that Marcus Webb, the owner, systematically stole from her apron pocket. He was a man of 62 with a grey suit that never fit quite right and hands that were always reaching, always touching. He would wait until she was alone in the back and corner her against the freezer and tell her that if she wanted to keep her job, she knew what she needed to do. She never did what he asked her to do, and somehow she had kept her job anyway, which meant only that he was patient, and patience was the cruelest form of threat. The children had been staying with her mother, but her mother had a stroke on the Friday after the fire, a stroke that took her ability to speak and most of her ability to walk, and suddenly Vivien was responsible for her mother too. 3 people. 1 person's wages. $34 between them and total erasure. The shelter told her they had a bed available but only for 1 adult and 1 child. She could not split her family. She could not leave Luis alone or Maria alone or her mother alone. She could not divide herself into 3 versions of a person that still had only 1 exhausted body. "We will figure it out," she told the children on the 5th day, when they were sleeping in a motel room that cost $80 a night, a price that would destroy her in 4 days. "We will figure it out." But the figure-it-out feeling was wearing thin, like cloth that had been washed too many times. Luis looked at her with eyes that had aged years in 5 days. Are we going to be okay, Mom? She could not lie to him. She could not pretend. But she could not tell him the truth either, which was that she did not know, that the math had stopped working, that something would have to give, and when something gives under pressure, everything falls. I am going to work double shifts, she told him. I am going to save every penny. And we are going to be okay. She did not believe it. But she said it anyway, which was a kind of prayer. At the diner that night, Marcus Webb cornered her again, his breath smelling like whiskey, his hand on her arm just firm enough to be a threat. Your situation, he said carefully, must be difficult. A woman alone. Children to feed. That $150,000 in medical debt your husband left behind. Tragic, really. She had not told him about the debt. She did not know how he knew. I could help you, he continued. If you were nicer to me. If you understood how business works. She pulled her arm away and said nothing, and he smiled because silence was agreement to certain kinds of men. That was the night before Nico Russo's son collapsed on the floor, burning with fever, his small body a canvas for suffering, waiting for someone to save him. That was the night before Vivien Rivera learned that sometimes the universe places you in front of a moment, and in that moment, you move without thinking, and in moving, you change the entire trajectory of your life. The rain outside the diner was constant now, drumming against the windows like a warning that no one heeded. The Red Cross shelter smelled like bleach and sorrow. Rows of cots stretched across the gymnasium floor, separated by thin fabric dividers that offered the illusion of privacy but nothing more. Vivien sat on the edge of a military-issue blanket, her two children sleeping on the cot beside her, their small bodies curled toward each other like they were still in the womb, seeking the safety they could no longer find in the world. Emma, 9 years old, clutched a stuffed rabbit missing one ear, the only toy that survived the fire. Lucas, 6, had his thumb in his mouth, something he had stopped doing 2 years ago, something that had returned the moment the smoke entered their lungs. Vivien held the photograph. It was water-damaged from the fire hose, the edges curled and darkened, the image of Daniel beginning to fade like he was already becoming a ghost. Her husband smiled at the camera, standing in front of their apartment building 4 years ago, younger then, before the business failed, before the creditors started calling, before he died in a hospital bed at 41, his heart giving out the way everything in their life had given out, suddenly, without warning, leaving her to manage the wreckage alone. She unfolded the piece of notebook paper. The list. The one she had written in the hospital chapel 3 days after his funeral, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. Every creditor. Every debt. Every number that represented a decision Daniel had made without her, a hole that kept growing deeper, a gravity that kept pulling them down. $67,000 to a private lender. $43,000 in medical bills from his final hospitalization. $28,000 in credit card debt. $12,000 to his business partner, a man named Victor who had stopped returning her calls. $150,000 in 10 days or they would take legal action. Take what? She did not know. There was nothing left to take. The apartment was ash. The car was financed. The furniture was borrowed from the Red Cross donation center. What remained was just her body and her children's bodies and the knowledge that she had $400 to her name if she counted the money in the shelters lost and found that nobody had claimed after 30 days. No. She had $34. She had counted it 3 times that morning, folding the bills carefully, tucking them into her apron pocket where she could feel them, where she could know for certain they were still there, that she had not imagined them, that $34 was real and solid and all that stood between her and the street. Emma stirred in her sleep, made a small sound, reached for her mother without waking. Vivien took her daughter's hand and held it. The child's palm was warm and damp and alive, which was something. Which was everything. Which was not enough. The shelter worker, a woman named Patricia with kind eyes and a wedding ring she twisted constantly as if it was the only thing keeping her tethered to her own life, appeared with 2 blankets and a plastic bag containing donated clothes. For the children, she said. Sweaters, socks. Some pants that might fit. She paused, and her voice dropped. The emergency housing list has a wait. Probably 2 weeks. Maybe 3. She twisted the ring. You have family? Someone who? No, Vivien said. No one. Patricia left the bag and walked away quietly, the way people do when they understand that words are sometimes violence. The morning came grey and cold. Vivien walked her children to school. Emma's new sweater was 3 sizes too large, hanging off her shoulders, making her look even smaller than she was. Lucas's shoes did not match, one brown, one black, both from the donation bin, both slightly wrong. They did not complain. Children of disaster learn quickly not to complain. Are we going to live here? Emma asked, her hand in her mother's, her eyes fixed on the sidewalk ahead. No, baby. We're going to find a place. A real place. A home. When? Soon. The lie felt like a stone in Vivien's throat. She swallowed it anyway. That evening, she reported to Webb's Diner on Mission Street. The restaurant was old, the kind of place that had been serving the same menu for 30 years without ever improving it, which meant the pancakes were always slightly rubbery and the coffee tasted like metal, but it was open at night, which meant Vivien could work while her children slept at the shelter, which meant she could earn money that would almost certainly not be enough to close a $150,000 hole, but it was something. The back entrance door was propped open. Marcus Webb stood waiting, his silhouette framed by the kitchen light behind him. He was in his 50s, the kind of man who had been handsome once and had grown cruel when that was no longer enough to get what he wanted. His hair was slicked back with product that caught the light. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a grey-haired chest and a gold chain that cost more than Vivien's monthly rent used to cost. He smiled when he saw her, and the smile contained no warmth. "Vivien," he said, moving toward her. "I heard about your fire. Terrible tragedy. Truly terrible." "Thank you," she whispered. His hand found the small of her back. Not aggressive yet. Not threatening yet. Just a hand on her back, firm enough that she understood it was not accidental, that it was a statement, that the location of his hand was intentional. "You are in a difficult position now, I imagine. 2 children. No husband. The insurance probably did not cover everything. These things never do." He stepped closer. She could smell his cologne and underneath it something else, something sour. "You need this job, Vivien. You need it very badly. Which means you need to understand how things work here. How I work. What I expect from my best girls when they are in a difficult position." Her skin was crawling, a sensation like insects running across her nerves. She pulled away, but slowly, not too fast, not in a way that would anger him, because she had learned in the past 4 months that there are many kinds of violence and some of them do not leave marks. "I need to start my shift," she said. He smiled wider. "Of course. But we will continue this conversation. When you need something, Vivien, you come talk to Marcus. I can help you." She walked into the diner. The fluorescent lights were too bright, creating a sickly white illumination that made everything look slightly dead. The checkered floor, black and white squares, stretched out before her like a chessboard on which she was a pawn with no possible moves. The smell of the kitchen hit her, stale grease, burnt coffee, the ghost of 1,000 meals already forgotten. The hum of the refrigerator case created a constant background noise, a low drone that seemed to vibrate in her teeth. Behind the counter, another waitress named Rosa was refilling the sugar dispensers. She was older, maybe 60, with a face that had weathered decades of night shifts and small humiliations. She glanced up at Vivien and her expression shifted to something like pity, which was worse than anything else because pity meant she understood exactly what Vivien was walking into. "He is in a mood today," Rosa said quietly. "Be careful." He took the tips again. "All of them." Said they were for damages to the register. There were no damages to the register. Vivien tied her apron. The pocket already contained her name tag, a pen that did not write anymore, and a notepad with only 3 pages remaining. She looked at her reflection in the stainless steel napkin holder. She was 34 years old, but her face told a different story. The grief had aged her. The financial pressure had carved lines around her eyes. The loss of her husband had created a hollowness in her cheeks that made her look like a photograph of herself, something two-dimensional and fading. At 11 o'clock, the first customers arrived. An old man who ordered coffee and nothing else, just sat in the booth by the window, watching the street outside. A couple in their 20s, oblivious and happy, holding hands across the table, their entire lives still ahead of them, unaware of how quickly everything could burn. A group of construction workers, loud and hungry, leaving no tip despite ordering for meals and 3 rounds of coffee. By 3 in the morning, the diner was nearly empty. Vivien was cleaning the coffee machine when the bell above the front door chimed. She did not look up. She was tired in a way that sleep would not fix. She was tired in her bones, in her cells, in the part of her that had once believed life could be better than this. "We are closed," she called out without turning around. No one responded. She turned to see who had come in, and what she saw made her entire body go still. A man stood in the entrance. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an immaculate black suit that probably cost more than the car she used to own. Dark hair, silvered slightly at the temples. A scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, a thin white line that only made him look more dangerous. Behind him, 2 other men in identical suits, their posture speaking of obedience, of loyalty, of the kind of men who have learned not to ask questions. His eyes moved across the diner, cataloguing everything, missing nothing. Then they landed on Vivien, and something shifted in the room that she could not name but could absolutely feel. "We are actually open," a small voice said. Vivien realized with shock that the voice was hers. The man smiled. "Good. My son is hungry." A boy emerged from behind him. 7 years old, thin, with the same dark eyes as the man beside him. But the boy's eyes were different in another way. They held a sadness that no child should carry, a resignation, a knowledge of pain that made Vivien's heart crack open. "Table near the window," the man said. It was not a request. As she led them to a booth, Vivien had no way of knowing that this moment, this exact moment with the bell chiming and the rain starting to drum against the windows like a warning, this was the moment that would change everything. She had no way of knowing that the man beside her was Nico Russo, one of the most powerful organized crime figures in San Francisco, a man who had built an empire in shadow and blood. She had no way of knowing that his son, the quiet boy with sad eyes, had been born unable to walk, that every specialist in 3 states had declared him hopeless, that his father had spent millions trying to change what medicine said was permanent. She had no way of knowing that in approximately 40 minutes, this boy would collapse on the kitchen floor, burning with fever, his small body betraying him, and that she, Vivien Rivera, with nothing but her own experience with loss, would know exactly what to do. The black and white checkered floor gleamed under fluorescent lights that hummed like trapped wasps, and the jukebox in the corner played Patsy Cline for the 100th time that week. Vivien Rivera wiped down the counter at Webb's Diner, her movements mechanical, her mind somewhere else entirely, somewhere with her children in clean beds instead of borrowed cots at the Red Cross shelter. It was 2 in the morning, and the diner was empty except for a construction worker nursing cold coffee in booth 3 and Marcus Webb counting money behind the register with the satisfied expression of a man who had stolen something precious. She had worked here for 8 months. 8 months of graveyard shifts, of being on her feet for 16 hours straight, of watching every dollar slip through her fingers like water. The handwritten list in her apron pocket had grown to 9 pages now. 9 pages of debts. 9 pages of numbers that would not stop multiplying. The door chimed. 2 men in suits entered, their shoulders broad enough to block the light from outside. They moved with a specific kind of stillness that comes from knowing your presence changes the temperature of any room you enter. Behind them came a third man, taller than the other 2, carrying a small boy who could not walk. The boy's head rested against the man's shoulder, dark eyes half closed, exhausted in a way that suggested this journey had been long and ultimately pointless, as so many journeys had been before. Marcus Webb's face went pale. He actually stepped back from the register, his hand still holding the bills he had just stolen from Vivien's tip jar. The man set the boy carefully into a booth near the window. His movements were deliberate, controlled, each gesture economical and precise. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Vivien made in a month. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, pale against olive skin. When he looked at Vivien, his gaze was so direct it felt like a question she did not yet understand. "Coffee," he said. His voice was quiet, solid like an oath. "And water for my son." She moved toward the kitchen, her heart doing something strange in her chest. She had learned to recognize danger the way animals recognize storms, as a change in air pressure, a shift in how sound traveled through space. This man was dangerous. Not in the way Marcus Webb was dangerous with his wandering hands and his stealing and his threats. This was a different caliber of danger altogether. The kind that built empires and destroyed them. When she returned with the coffee and water, the boy was leaning forward to reach the glass, his small arm stretching across the table. His coordination was off, clumsy, his hand trembling slightly. The glass tipped. It fell in slow motion and shattered across the checkered floor with a sound like breaking teeth. The boy flinched, shame flooding his face. He tried to slide down from the booth to clean it up, but his legs would not respond. They hung motionless beneath the table like decorations that served no purpose. He pushed harder, his small face contorting with effort and frustration, and that was when his body began to convulse. His back arched. His eyes rolled backward. The fever that had been building all evening became suddenly visible, a wave of heat rolling off his skin like radiation. His small hands clawed at the edge of the booth. Nico Russo dropped to his knees. Not in prayer, though his lips moved silently in a language Vivien did not speak. In helplessness. In the complete and utter powerlessness of a man who had built an empire and could do absolutely nothing to save his own child. Vivien moved. She did not think about it. She had spent the last 4 months watching her own child suffer and had learned that thinking was a luxury poverty did not afford. She rolled Micah onto his side, cleared his airway, checked his pulse, and spoke in a voice that did not shake. "Call an ambulance. Now." Marco was already dialing. Franco stared at her as though she had just spoken in tongues. Marcus Webb had pressed himself against the far wall, his face the color of old newspaper. She remained with Micah until the paramedics arrived, her hand on his shoulder, monitoring his breathing. She did not move when Nico watched her with an expression she could not read. She did not move when he stood and rode with his son to the hospital, Marco and Franco trailing behind like shadows made solid. 20 minutes later, she was still wiping up the spilled water and broken glass when Marcus approached her with the $100 bill that Nico had left on the table. "Table fee," he said, and he smiled like a man who had just discovered a new way to steal. She looked at the $100 in his hand. That was 4 days of groceries. That was bus fare to a job interview she had scheduled for next week. That was the possibility of her children eating something other than donated soup and rice. "That is not yours," she said quietly. "Everything that happens in this diner is mine," Marcus replied. "You think you can keep tips? You think you work here?" His hand moved fast, the way it always did when he was about to touch her. She stepped back, and he laughed, a sound like gravel in a drain. The next morning, at 6:30, as she was helping Emma into her school uniform, her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost did not answer. Vivien Rivera? The voice was male, respectful, but carrying a weight of power that made her grip tighten on the phone. "Yes? My name is Marco. I work for Mr. Russo. He would like to see you. This afternoon. 2 o'clock. Her stomach dropped. "Why?" "Bring your children." He said that was important to him. The line went dead. 2 hours later, a black SUV pulled up outside the Red Cross shelter where she was packing her children's few belongings. Marco stepped out, immaculate in a dark suit despite the heat, and opened the door for her like she was someone who mattered. The drive took 30 minutes through San Francisco streets that grew progressively more expensive, more manicured, more impossible. They arrived at San Francisco General Hospital, the private wing on the 7th floor. Micah was awake. The fever had broken. But his legs beneath the white sheets remained exactly as they had always been, present, but not functional. A tragedy that medicine had already accepted as permanent. Nico Russo sat beside his son's bed. He stood when Vivien entered, and she saw it then, the exhaustion, the weight, the knowledge that he had built an empire with his hands and that those same hands could not fix what mattered most. "He has been asking for you," Nico said. "He calls you Vivi." "I have known him for 40 minutes, Vivien said. "I know." He gestured to 2 chairs. Emma and Luca sat carefully, eyes wide, understanding on some instinctive level that this man controlled something vast and dangerous. "I need to know your situation. Who you are. Why you moved without fear when everyone else froze." So she told him. She told him about Daniel, about the fire, about the list that kept growing. She showed him the 9 pages of handwriting, the numbers that would not stop multiplying. She told him about Marcus Webb stealing her tips, about Evelyn Blackwell's telephone call last week offering work that came with the kind of smile that meant suffering. She told him about $34 in a wallet and a landlord who would not answer her calls. When she finished, Nico was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I will pay your debts." Vivien laughed, a sound with no humor in it at all. "Why would you do that?" "Because you saved my son." His voice did not rise, but something in it made the air feel colder. "Because when everyone else froze, you moved. Because there is a code in this world about people who show loyalty, and you showed it to a stranger." "I am nobody," she said. "I work graveyard shift at a diner for $9 an hour before Marcus steals half of it." "Then work for me," Nico replied. "Care for my son. Someone who is not afraid. Someone who acts." The door opened. A woman in a designer suit entered, her platinum hair arranged perfectly, her smile sharp as glass. Evelyn Blackwell, hotel magnate, owner of properties across 3 states, and silent architect of the suffering that had been systematically destroying women in San Francisco's service industry for 7 years. Her eyes found Vivien immediately, catalogued the borrowed clothes, the exhaustion, the desperation, and she recognized what Vivien was instantly, a woman who could be broken. "Mr. Russo," she said, her voice like honey poured over concrete. "I heard about your son's hospitalization. I came to offer my assistance." "And who is this?" Nico did not hesitate. "A friend." Evelyn's smile did not waver. "How charitable." "I run programs helping desperate women find work. Exclusive work. Very well compensated. If your friend needs employment, I have several opportunities available." She handed a card to Vivien, her fingers lingering just long enough to convey something that felt like a threat. "Think about it, darling. You look like someone who could use a real opportunity." When she left, the room felt slightly warmer and infinitely more dangerous. Nico turned back to Vivien. "Do you know who that woman is?" "No." "Good. Keep it that way." He looked at his son, then back at Vivien. "Starting tomorrow, you do not work at Webb's Diner anymore. You work here, and then you work for me. Your children will be safe. Your debts will be erased. And anyone who tries to hurt you will answer to me." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell him that she did not take charity, that she would earn her way, that she was not the kind of woman who accepted help from powerful men without understanding the cost. But then Lucas reached over and took her hand, and Emma leaned against her shoulder, and she realized that refusing was a luxury she did not have. It was 3 in the morning when she finally returned to the shelter and lay in the dark, the business card from Evelyn Blackwell still in her apron pocket, glowing with something that felt very much like a countdown timer. In the distance, she heard thunder rumbling across the bay, and she thought about storms, about how they announce themselves long before they arrive, and about how sometimes the only way to survive them is to run. 1 week had passed since Vivien Rivera signed away her life to the man who could remake it. The apartment Nico arranged sat 3 blocks from the bay, a modest 1-bedroom with walls that did not leak and a refrigerator that hummed with electricity paid in full. Her debts had evaporated, $150,000 transferred to creditors the night they met, erased from existence like they had never been written into her skin. But standing in front of the mirror in her new bathroom, she barely recognized the woman looking back. She was still Vivien. Still the same calloused hands, still the same tired eyes. But something had shifted. The weight had not lifted. It had simply changed addresses. Every morning, she took the bus to the Russo estate where Mike awaited. The boy's paralysis remained unchanged, his legs still would not respond, still would not move, still remained locked in the prison of his own nervous system. But his voice had found strength. His eyes had learned to focus on something other than the ceiling. 3 days ago, he had laughed. A real laugh, not the hollow sound of a child performing recovery for adults. Vivien would arrive at 9 in the morning with physical therapy manuals spread across her knees, studying techniques she did not understand, reading medical journals late into the night with a dictionary beside her. She was not trained. She was not qualified. But she was here, and the boy needed her, and that was the only credential that mattered anymore. Nico watched these sessions from doorways and hallways. She could feel his gaze the way you feel a presence in a dark room, not seeing it, but knowing it is there. In 15 years, Marco had told her quietly one afternoon while she waited for Micah's medication, no one had ever seen him like this. The way he moved around her was different. Careful. Like she was something breakable that he did not want to shatter. "You do not have to stay," she told him one evening as the sun collapsed into the bay. "I know you have business. I know I am taking time away from your empire." He had looked at her for a long moment before answering. "My empire can wait. My son cannot." His voice carried something that sounded like stone being split open. "And you are not taking anything, Vivien. You are giving." But that night, as she rode the bus back to her apartment through the fog-wrapped streets of San Francisco, a card was waiting in her mailbox. Cream-colored. Expensive. Handwriting that looked like it had been trained to be cruel. "Miss Rivera, I hope your new accommodations are suitable. Let us discuss your future. E.B." The card had no return address. It did not need one. 2 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon sharp with salt wind, Marcus Webb appeared at the diner kitchen door while Vivien was retrieving her final paycheck. She had not planned to return. She had written a letter of resignation, left it with the assistant manager, moved on. But the check had not been mailed. The check, it turned out, was the bait. Marcus stood in the doorway with his apron still tied around his waist, his face a color between purple and rage. The kitchen fell silent. The fryers stopped their sizzle. The cook disappeared into the walk-in cooler like a man abandoning a sinking ship. "You think you can just leave?" His voice was low, venomous. "You think you can abandon this place, this job, me, and walk away like nothing happened here?" She did not answer. Silence, she had learned, was sometimes armor. "I gave you shifts when no one else would," he continued, stepping toward her. 12-hour nights when your precious children were at home alone. "I kept you alive, Vivien, and this is how you repay loyalty." "I am grateful for the work," she said, her voice barely a whisper, like a candle in the wind. "I have been grateful every day. But I cannot stay here anymore." His hand moved like a blade wrapped in ice. He grabbed her wrist, spinning her against the stainless steel counter. The impact drove the air from her lungs. His fingers dug into her skin with the certainty of a man who had never learned that some creatures are not meant to be caged. "You are mine, Vivien. These debts, this apartment, this rich man playing savior, it all disappears. He will grow bored. They always do. And when he does, you will come crawling back to me. You will beg. And I will make you remember what it costs to betray the only person who ever believed in you." His grip tightened. Her vision narrowed to a pinpoint. She thought of her children. She thought of the photograph of Daniel. She thought of drowning. The diner door opened with the sound of a bell, but the footsteps that followed did not belong to a customer. Franco stood in the threshold like a man carved from shadow. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply existed in that doorway, and Marcus Webb's courage evaporated like rain on hot asphalt. "Let her go," Franco said. Each word was measured, deliberate, the kind of quiet that comes before catastrophe. Marcus released her immediately, his hands raising in surrender. She owes me. She owes you nothing. Franco stepped inside. The diner had not seemed small until he entered it. She has told you she is leaving. That conversation is finished. Vivien walked past Marcus Webb without looking at him. At the door, she paused and turned back once. He was already diminishing in her mind, becoming less a man and more a stain she was leaving behind. "You taught me something useful," she said, and her voice was no longer a whisper. It carried something that sounded like freedom. "You taught me what small men sound like when they are afraid of losing control. I will not forget that. But I will not remember you." The next morning brought another confrontation, this one wrapped in cashmere and expensive perfume. Evelyn Blackwell waited outside Micah's hospital room on the pediatric floor of St. Mary's Medical Center. She stood in heels that cost more than Vivien's monthly rent, her blonde hair arranged in a sculpture of intentional cruelty, her smile precisely calibrated to make other women feel inadequate. "You are a clever little opportunist, aren't you?" Evelyn said, stepping into Vivien's path. "Seduce the grieving father. Play savior to the crippled child. Learn his secrets. Learn the family business. I have seen your type before, Miss Rivera. There are dozens like you in this city. Desperate girls who mistake kindness for ownership." Vivien tried to move past her. Evelyn sidestepped, blocking her again. "I have connections," Evelyn continued, her voice dropping to something that sounded like a threat wrapped in silk. "Social services. Family court. Immigration enforcement. One phone call and I can make your children disappear into the foster system within 48 hours. They will be separated, placed in homes for hours apart, and you will never see them again. Not for custody visits. Not for phone calls. Never. That is the power I possess, Miss Rivera. Do you understand me?" Vivien's hands began to shake. She locked them into fists at her sides. "I am helping a sick child," she said. "That is all this is." "That is never all," Evelyn hissed, and she walked away with the confidence of a woman who had never met a threat she could not manufacture. That night, Vivien sat on the fire escape of her apartment in the humid August darkness, the bay spread out below her like a bed of broken glass. Thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the horizon, announcing storms that had not yet arrived. She held a water-damaged photograph of Daniel, his smile frozen in time, his eyes looking at something she could no longer reach, and felt herself beginning to dissolve. "Maybe they are right," she thought. "Maybe I am nobody. Maybe my presence in their lives is only a countdown to disaster. Maybe my children would be safer, happier, better if I disappeared entirely. Maybe the greatest act of love I could perform would be to remove myself from their lives and let them forget I had ever existed." Her hand shook. Cold rain began to fall on her skin, each drop a small accusation. Then she heard Lucas call out from inside the apartment. "Mom? Are you out there? I had a bad dream." That small voice. That child who had learned to trust her. That boy who had survived his father's death, his mother's breakdown, the collapse of everything stable, and still believed that she would be there when he needed her. She stood up. She wiped her face. She went inside and held her son until his breathing steadied, and she made a choice without fully understanding yet what that choice would cost. But what neither of them knew was that Nico Russo had already begun the systematic dismantling of everyone who threatened her. 2 hours after Vivien returned to her apartment, Nico sat in a federal building downtown, across a table from 2 FBI agents whose careers had been built on taking down organized crime. He carried a folder thick with evidence. Marcus Webb and Evelyn Blackwell, he said, sliding the file across the table. I have financial records spanning 8 years. Witness testimonies. Banking transfers. Trafficking evidence. Human smuggling documents. Everything you need to bury them both. The senior agent opened the folder slowly, his expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching wonder. This is comprehensive. How long have you been gathering this? Years, Nico said. I was waiting for the right moment. And that moment is now. Nico thought of Vivien on the fire escape, thinking she was nobody. He thought of Micah's paralyzed legs and the small victories they represented. He thought of a woman who had been invisible for so long that she had forgotten she was supposed to exist. Yes, he said. That moment is now. 5 days later, dawn arrived like a gunshot in the silence. 15 FBI agents in tactical gear surrounded Marcus Webb's diner at 6 in the morning. Their vehicles blocked both entrances. Their weapons were visible but holstered. They did not need them. When they found Marcus Webb in his office, counting the previous night's till, he collapsed before they even spoke the word arrest. His knees buckled. His composure shattered like glass dropped from a great height. Cameras captured everything, the once confident restaurant owner weeping, trembling, begging, his voice breaking into incoherence as federal agents handcuffed him. I did not do anything, he screamed as they led him out. She is lying. They are all lying. You cannot do this to me. But they could. And they did. Simultaneously, in her Hotel Empire headquarters, Evelyn Blackwell sat in a board meeting surrounded by her executives and financial advisors. 12 federal agents entered the conference room without knocking. They surrounded the table. They placed their badges on the mahogany surface. Evelyn's composure held for 3 full seconds before fracturing entirely. Do you know who I am? She demanded, her voice sharp as a knife. I will have your badges. I will destroy you. I have lawyers, I have connections, I have. You have a 40-year federal prison sentence, the lead agent said, reading from a document. Human trafficking. Organized wage theft. Racketeering. Conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. The rest happened in slow motion and at terrifying speed simultaneously. Evelyn's carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. Her hotel stock plummeting. Media outlets running the story every 7 minutes. By noon, 5 million people had seen footage of her arrest. By evening, her name had become synonymous with exploitation itself. Vivien watched from her apartment as both villains were systematically destroyed. Not through death, too quick, too merciful, but through the slow, methodical dismantling of everything they had built. Federal prison. Public humiliation. Financial ruin. The knowledge that they would spend decades behind bars, stripped of power, forgotten by the world that had once feared them. She understood, in that moment, exactly what Nico Russo had done and what it would cost her. The hospital room smells like antiseptic and hope, a combination that should not exist but somehow does. Vivien Rivera sits beside Micah Russo's bed at 6 in the morning, the San Francisco fog pressing against the window like a living thing trying to get inside. The boy is 7 years old now, his small frame draped in blue hospital sheets, his legs thinner than they should be but stronger than they were 3 weeks ago. She wraps her hands around his right calf and begins the stretching routine she has done every single day for the past 6 months. Slowly. Deliberately. Without rushing. Miss Vivien, Micah's voice is small, uncertain. Do you think I will ever walk? She does not pause her work. Her thumbs press into the muscle with the confidence of someone who has already survived the unsurvivable. I think your body is stronger than anyone knows. Including you. The boy watches her hands move. My father says you are the bravest person he has ever met. Vivien's hands still for just a moment. Your father says a lot of things. Only true things, a voice says from the doorway, deep and solid like an oath. Nico Russo fills the frame like a storm waiting to happen. He wears a charcoal suit that costs more than Vivien's monthly rent, his dark hair silvered slightly at the temples from months of tension that would have broken most men. But it is his eyes that have changed most. The hardness that once defined him has cracked open like a sealed vault. He watches Vivien work with his son the way a man watches a miracle happen in real time, knowing that if he looks away, it will disappear. She does not look up. "You are back early." The meeting could wait. He steps inside and closes the door. The soft click of it echoes through the room like a choice being made. How is he today? Strong. Stronger every day. Vivien shifts Micah's leg gently, extending it further than its stretch last week. The boy flinches but does not cry. She lowers his leg and begins working on the other side. The muscle memory is returning. The specialists were wrong about what was possible. The specialists were wrong about a lot of things. Nico pulls a chair beside the bed and sits, his movements careful, deliberate. He does not reach for his son. He never does. Instead, he watches Vivien's hands move with a precision that reminds him of a surgeon's touch, except she uses no instruments, just patience and the refusal to accept impossible. "I brought the research you asked for." 3 medical journals on nerve regeneration therapy. The Experimental Treatment Center in Seattle is willing to evaluate him. They specialize in cases that other doctors have dismissed. Vivien nods, still working. Her dark hair is pulled back in a simple braid, strands escaping around her face. There are circles under her eyes. She has been working double shifts at the therapy clinic during the day and spending evenings here. "When can we schedule an evaluation?" "Whenever you say." "I have already made the arrangements." He pauses. "I would like to take you both. If you will allow it." This time she does look at him. Their eyes meet across the small distance of the hospital room and something passes between them, something unspoken and careful, built on months of watching each other from doorways, of conversations that lasted hours, of the fragile trust that grows when 2 people save each other from drowning. "I will think about it," Vivien says finally. Marco appears in the doorway 20 minutes later, his massive frame blocking out the hallway light. He has been Nico's lieutenant for 15 years, but this is the first time he has seen his boss sit quietly beside a boy for 45 minutes, asking questions about physical therapy protocols, listening to a woman explain the science of nerve regeneration with the attention of a student rather than a king. When Nico finally leaves the room, Marco follows him into the hallway. "The boy is walking more," Marco observes. His voice carries the weight of a man stating facts. 3 steps yesterday. For this morning. Because she refuses to stop, Nico says. The elevator doors open. They step inside. Every specialist said permanent paralysis. Every doctor said impossible. And she walks in every morning like they never said those words. She loves the boy. She loves what he could become. There is a difference. Nico's jaw tightens. Love builds the future. Hope is just the first step toward it. She gave him both. The elevator descends in silence, the kind of silence that happens before something breaks open. 6 weeks pass in increments of muscle movement and small victories. Vivien discovers an experimental nerve stimulation therapy that specialists in other cities have been too afraid to try. She reaches out to the research center in Seattle. They agree to a consultation. Nico arranges private transportation, a town car that arrives at the hospital at dawn, the driver waiting with the engine running. The drive takes 8 hours. Vivien sits in the back seat beside Micah, holding a tablet with videos of other patients who had been told they would never walk again. Children who defy the diagnosis. Teenagers who rebuilt their bodies through relentless work. Adults who learned that impossible is just another word for not yet. Will it hurt? Micah asks as Seattle skyline emerges from the rain. Yes, Vivien answers. She does not lie to him. But hurt means your body is remembering how to work. Your nerves are waking up. That is what we want. At the research center, doctors examine him for 3 hours. They run tests and ask questions and study the imaging from San Francisco. Then the lead neurologist, a woman with silver hair and the kind of eyes that have seen miracles happen, sits with Vivien and explains what she has already begun to believe in her heart. The paralysis was not as complete as previously thought, the doctor says. There is neural activity here and here. With targeted stimulation therapy and aggressive physical therapy, we might achieve significant mobility recovery. It will take time. It will be painful. But the word permanent may not apply. Vivien's hands grip the arms of the chair so hard her knuckles turn white. She does not cry. She never cries. But something in her chest breaks open like a sealed door giving way to light. They begin treatment immediately. Twice weekly, Vivien brings Micah to the clinic. She works alongside the specialists, learning the protocols, understanding the science, becoming so much more than a waitress who once cleaned tables for men who stole her tips. She becomes the woman who refused to accept the word impossible. 3 months after the first treatment session, Nico stands in the doorway of the physical therapy room and watches his son attempt something that every medical establishment in California said would never happen. Micah stands between 2 parallel bars, his legs shaking with effort that feels like climbing a mountain, and he takes 1 step forward. Then another. Then another. His right leg trembles. His left leg follows, moving with a precision that seemed impossible 6 months ago. The paralysis that every specialist declared permanent begins to fracture like ice under spring heat. It is not magic. It is not a miracle in the religious sense. It is months of relentless work, experimental treatments, physical therapy protocols that push past the boundaries of what doctors said was safe, and one boy's stubborn refusal to accept limitation. But it is impossible nonetheless. Nico's hands grip the doorframe so hard his knuckles turn white. Marco and Franco stand behind him, witnessing something they never thought they would see. The man who has survived betrayal, built an empire in shadows, and learned to trust no one stands motionless as his son walks. 6 steps. 7. 8. Micah reaches the end of the bars and turns, his face bright with tears and effort and the kind of joy that only comes when you have been told something is impossible and you did it anyway. He sees his father in the doorway and his face breaks open. "Papa," he calls. "Papa, I am walking." Nico turns away before anyone can see his face. The sound of his breathing fills the hallway, ragged, broken, like a man who has just survived a war he did not know he was fighting. Marco places a hand on his shoulder. No words come. No words exist for this. When Nico turns back, Micah has collapsed into Vivien's arms, crying and laughing simultaneously. She holds him against her chest, her own eyes streaming, and in that moment she is no longer a widow with $34 and a list of debts that kept growing. She is a woman who rebuilt a boy's future with nothing but determination and the refusal to surrender. Nico watches them from the doorway, understanding at last exactly what strength looks like when it wears a human face. 14 months after that August night at the diner, Vivien stands at a penthouse window overlooking San Francisco Bay. The city lights reflect on dark water like scattered diamonds. Her apartment, her own apartment, paid for with money she earned herself, sits high above the world that once tried to grind her into dust. She has built a successful physical therapy practice specializing in cases other doctors call hopeless. She has her own business. Her own savings account. Her children attend private school and have never once had to worry about whether they would eat dinner. The foreclosure notices are gone. The debts are paid. The villains sit in federal prison, their power stripped away, their names synonymous with exploitation. She is free. Footsteps approach from behind. She does not turn around. She has learned to recognize the weight of his step, the careful way he moves in her spaces, respecting her sovereignty. "I needed to tell you something," Nico says. His voice carries the weight of confession, the gravity of a man who has spent months building the courage to speak. "I have been carrying this for a long time." Vivien turns from the window. Nico stands in the doorway of her penthouse. She had given him a key months ago, the gesture of trust between 2 people who saved each other. He wears an open-collared shirt beneath his suit jacket, and in the city light she can see the scars across his chest, a map of battles fought in darkness. Micah walks now, Nico says. He walks because you refuse to accept impossible. You gave him hope when I had nothing left but money and power and the belief that those things could solve every problem. You taught me that they solve nothing. He steps closer. I have built an empire in shadows. I have survived betrayal. My own brother sold our family to enemies and I had to choose between mercy and survival. I chose survival. I have made terrible choices. But you made me want to be better. His hands are shaking. I am asking forgiveness for the only power I ever knew how to wield: money, control, force. I am asking if a man like me could ever deserve a woman like you. Vivien looks at this dangerous man rendered vulnerable, this king on his knees in her penthouse, asking permission. You paid my debts when I was drowning, she says. You protected my children when I could not. You destroyed the people who tried to break me. But the greatest thing you did was let me rebuild myself. You did not try to save me. You gave me the space to save myself. He reaches for her hand. And now? Now we see what happens when two broken people try to build something whole. They stand together at the window, looking out over the city that almost destroyed them both. The rain begins to fall, soft at first, then heavier, washing the city clean. Somewhere below, the streets where Vivien once counted her last dollars glisten with water and reflected light. Real strength is not found in never falling but in always standing back up. This story teaches us that even in the darkest moments, love finds a way. If you believe that, hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment and tell us how this story made you feel. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.